Hey there, welcome to Contracts and Chaos. My name's Alyssa.
And I'm Brenna, and we're here to tell you that you are not alone in the mayhem of this real estate industry.
We're keeping it real and sharing our stories, strategies, and successes in today's real estate world.
So come join us every Tuesday while we talk
Contract
contracts
and
and
Chaos.
chaos. Back
We are
Tuesday.
back.
We are back, and we are going to talk about some real estate mishaps, some things that have happened
Yes.
in transactions in our careers that felt like felt bad and then what we did afterwards. Do you want to go first?
Blunders, setbacks, and recovery. I think my biggest one was last year I had two clients cancel contracts and discontinue shopping.
Mm.
And I didn't have financially for me personally, didn't have the next thing lined up because I wasn't at a point in my business where I was good at handling what was currently happening while also building to find the next clients.
Right.
So I was like, oh, great, cool. We're going to close on a $500,000 house. And I hadn't counted those eggs before they hatched or chickens before they hatched, but I didn't have anything else coming in case they didn't hatch. And so that's been my biggest thing this year. And I'm looking at my numbers again. Um, that I've done really well on. Like I haven't had anything cancel this year. Well, one, but we were 4 days into the contract and I knew it wasn't going to close
Mm.
anyway. So that didn't surprise me. But I had to focus on to not have that situation happen again. Oh, well, I'm under contract with something, still building to find the next one, still making sure that I'm prospecting and finding new clients and nurturing leads. And I think your first year or two in the business, that's kind of hard to do because you're like, at least for me, I was always panicking, like, I can't fuck up this transaction. I can't fuck up this transaction. Well, I'm not going to fuck it up. It's just paperwork. But I was so stressed and worried about it. And in those years, that was when everything you had 15 minutes to get an offer in, 5 days of due diligence. You want a survey? Don't even think about it. Like, so you had to be right there. And I think knowing what I know now, I should have hired a transaction coordinator that year. Even though I didn't have a ton of business, I should have been handing that portion of it off so that I could, while still nurturing those clients who are under contract and making sure things are good, I could also slightly walk away and continue pushing the ball forward. Continue make sure we're making the I'm going to use all these football references because I'm wrapped up in Florida State this week. Pushing for yardage down the field to get that the next touchdown. And the next touchdown is not necessarily the closing, but getting another client under contract or listing. I wasn't good at that continuum.
Mhm.
So when each of those fell out, one was in June and one was in like October, November last year, all of a sudden I was going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Um, that's been my biggest hurdle, my biggest oops, I think. I I don't want to jinx myself, but I can't say I've had any other blunders or setbacks. I'm sure through this conversation maybe I'll think of something. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I think one of my biggest skills is that I'm so terrified of going to real estate school or real estate jail or being sued that I'm like, checkbox, checkbox. Like, I just keep everything as in check as possible. So, I guess another tool of mine that I use to avoid being in that position in the future is I have a Trello board for sellers, I have one for buyers, I have one for my pipeline. And it has every task you could potentially need with a client and it's broken down in the stages of a transaction. Like, okay, this is before we go buying, we have the are we pre-approved? Who's your lender? All of those, like, have we discussed how this works? Just a checklist to keep me on track. And then when we are under contract, same thing. Okay, have we sent the contract to the attorney? Has due diligence been delivered? And it's just a checklist to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I'm not going to go to real estate jail. I'm not going to get sued, hopefully. And to make sure, like, okay, I've touched this today. It's done. I can walk away and continue to push that ball down the field to get the next touchdown.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh my gosh,
I
you are football forward today.
I am, like, obsessed with the Florida State situation. I was at that game Saturday night. They got robbed.
Yeah, I
But
heard.
anyway,
I heard. Trello, I can't believe that you've kept that from me for the last 2
I thought
years.
you knew about this.
No, I
I would
am
have told you.
newly obsessed with Trello. So I'm very excited to use that this year. So blunders, I guess for me, I looked a little bit more transactional. There are two transactions that I think of right off the top of my head that I was like, oh, learned something from that one, right? And then the other one would be, and it wasn't even really a blunder, but like when I first started as a solo agent coming out of a team, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Like this is not
Mhm,
going to work. I had to redo, rebrand, re everything. And that wasn't a blunder, and it wasn't even a setback, honestly. Like it was a U-turn, quite frankly, for my business. And that's when everything started going up, way up, which is great. That's the year that my business doubled, and it's increased every year since then. So that was great. But for blenders, I was thinking about two instances. One was this year, and it was a appraisal issue, and I feel like a lot of people run into this issue with appraisals, right? But for me personally, it's the first one that had ever come back so alarming that we had to fight about it, right? So I had a listing, and based on the comps that I use, we had it priced just under, honestly, where we could have been. And we went under contract the first week. Like everything was lined up. The inspections were done. The appraiser came out, and everything screeched to a halt because it came in $40,000 under list price. And the comps that he'd used, because the buyer's agent on this one was a little bit newer, and she was like, well, like here's, I'll just send you the appraisal, which is great because I was able to look at it, and I'm like, none of these houses I would have chosen, right? You've got a house that's nearly 1,000 square feet smaller than this house,
that's a lot of square footage.
one that's 800 square feet bigger, one that was built 10 years later. Like, none of them worked. He had one way more expensive, way less expensive, and he tried to meet them in the middle, and that's where he came up with this price. And my seller panicked, right? Because she was only moving, she's downsizing to be able to not have a monthly mortgage payment. She's owned this house since it was new construction in 2012. She's paid down a huge amount of her mortgage, and she wants to sell it, buy something smaller with the profit, and not have a monthly payment. It should be easy to do. But with that number that the appraisal came back at, she was like, I can't do what I need to do at that number. Right. So
Right.
if that is truly what my house is worth, I need to pull it off the market. And I was like, I don't want her to pull it off the market, obviously, because I do think that it was a mistake. It was an error. So we walked through appealing, yeah, we appealed the appraisal. I sent in all of my comps, which he already had access to, because for buyers and sellers, I do an appraisal packet.
Yes, I
um
was gonna ask you about that.
yeah, so I do an appraisal packet for every transaction, no matter if it's a listing or a buy side, and show the appraiser what I'm seeing for value and how I got there, right? It includes the survey, the floor plan, all of this stuff. It is a ready-made info packet that, whether they use it or not, all of the information is there.
Yes, I delivered
um
one yesterday for my buyer
that's
because
perfect.
I feel like we're gonna have to battle. The appraisal's due today, and I'm like,
I don't like to battle. I don't like to battle. That's
yeah, I don't
why
wanna
I
battle.
I come to the table prepared. Here is all of the information that you should need, right? And he had all that information. Not one of the comps was used. Not one of them, which I was a little like, that's odd. That's never happened.
Right.
So I sent in those again, and he rejected each and every one of them because it ended up being, he wanted to keep it so close in that specific neighborhood, which is fine on a regular basis, right? You either have to go back far enough in that neighborhood to get comps
Right.
that are similar to that house, or we spread out a little bit farther outside of the neighborhood recently. That's where we were at. And he didn't he didn't want to do either. All of the comps that I used newer comps because recently like prices have changed so much recently. So
Yeah, they've
for
been jumping all over the place here.
for me to go back to last year to find the same floor plan house inside the community, I was like, I just don't feel like that's the strongest comparison
Yeah.
at this moment because so much has changed. So I went outside the community, but I kept all of the comps within a half a mile.
Right.
They're all they it was in a puddle this big, right? Um, and he said no. So we had my seller and I had a heart to heart because the buyers were like, well, if it's not worth it, we don't want to pay that. And so they terminated. We went back on the market. And it was school started that week that we went back on the market. And everything was slow. It's just that first couple of weeks of kids going back to school, there's not really that many showings, that kind of thing. And she's like, listen, I don't want to have to do this through the holidays. I was like, no, I completely understand. She wants to be settled and have some place to put up a Christmas tree and have Thanksgiving. So she said, we have until Halloween. We need to have a contract by Halloween so it can be closed before Thanksgiving.
Makes
And
sense. That makes sense.
it does. And I was totally fine with that because her plan was at that point, I want to pull it off the market and try again in the spring if everything works out. Fine. So we ended up going back under contract, and I get an the inspection. They ended up doing their own inspection again. Like nothing, everything was fine, you know. And here comes the appraisal. The appraisal was scheduled, and I was nervous because
Was it the same appraiser?
no, no,
Okay, good.
and that was a huge blessing for us. So he came in and I he called me that afternoon and said thank you for the appraisal packet, that it was very helpful. It would be back within 3 days. And I'm like, great. Hope everything went well. And it appraised list price. At list price, which is actually more than we were actually under contract for at that moment. You know what I mean? So I'm like, he used every single one of the comps that I used, and we ended up closing the day before Thanksgiving. So it worked out, but in that moment, I was like, oh, I don't want to lose this listing. I could because honestly, she was at a point where she loves her house, right? And she's like, well, I'll just keep it.
Right.
So in my mind, if she had pulled the listing, I don't know that she would have gone back on the market in the spring, you know? And that's just a
Yeah.
bummer. It's not about
Yep.
like losing the listing, but it's about the fact that I truly and was confident that the appraisal was wrong. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it wasn't one of those that I was like, yeah, we overpriced it. Like this, it is what it is. I truly felt that this was incorrect. And luckily, I had showed her the comps at, of course, at the listing presentation when we went through the appraisal and showed what he used versus what I used. And she felt confident enough in my information that I was sharing that she was willing to give us another shot. It worked out great. So
It's funny how appraisers like to wield their power sometimes. It and
it doesn't
how
make sense.
like it doesn't. And I've heard a lot of stories like this. I had one that didn't appraise. It was new construction. He he appraised the wrong house, which
Oh.
I'll get you know what? I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. It was two almost identical houses next door to each other because it was four new construction, two on one side of the street, two on the other.
Mm-hmm.
One was white, one was blue. And he appraised the wrong one, and he claimed that it's because the building permit was on the ground and he couldn't see it. And I was like, but you have a plat map. Like the lots are very clear. It's very clearly the last house on the street.
Right.
Anyway, um, and we fought him on it, and he said no. He said, absolutely not. I'm not changing it. Thankfully, my lender jumped into action and was like, hold on, like, he called my clients and was like, can I pull your credit again? I want to see if you qualify for first time home buyer assistance now. And they did. And that covered the gap that we had. So it worked out. So I think leaning on your lender is always a good possibility too, to be like, hey, is there a program we haven't thought about? Is there a way we can gap this without it coming out of their pocket?
Mhm.
Um, I also think, like you did and we did, like, fighting that appraisal. We've got the info, but yeah, I think that's a hard one when it doesn't appraise and you know your buyers don't have the cash or they're not willing to pay over. Like, yes, they agree to a contract, but appraising is part of that, so that makes it really hard. My o the one the 2 that I had fall through weren't because of appraisals, it was because of repairs.
Mm, that'll
And
get you too.
one Yeah, one, he wasn't a first-time home buyer, but he was going from a brand new townhouse to an older home, and we did an inspection. I represented the buyer, and I felt so bad for the seller
Oh
in
no.
this situation. Um, did the inspection. House looked good. There were a couple things where we were like, "Meh." There was, like, potentially $35,000 in repairs.
It's hard. It's
Repairs that they thought they had done by contractors, and we came in with our inspection and said, "You got screwed." Like, "Sorry." And they said, "We can't bring the price down. We're not willing to fix it." Nope. And my client was like, "Well, I'm not willing to move forward knowing I'm walking into another potentially $30,000 in repairs.
right.
That's silly." And I was like, "I get it. I get it." There are times where I can negotiate repairs and can get things to happen because a lot of times sellers don't realize. That's why I often, to prevent this with my sellers, I say, let's do a pre listing inspection.
Right.
Let's be ahead of this because not only does that know what we either need to fix, but that's also going to help us price this because if there is a major repair that we're going to have to disclose because you are not paying to fix it, we need to adjust the price now versus not know and be surprised down the road when a buyer does an inspection.
Mhm.
So I think if we're talking about how to avoid these, not only just overcome them, that's a great tip for a seller. Like, get an inspection before you list.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few companies here in North Carolina that will do like they'll do the pre-listing inspection and then they leave a sign in the yard with the QR code. And then, have you used these? They can
No.
scan the buyer's agent or the buyers can scan the QR code, and it's like they can pay the $15 or $20 and they get a copy of the home inspection report. But that
Mm.
$15 or $20 goes back to the seller. So essentially, depending on how many people look at the home inspection report, they get their investment of that $400 or $500 back.
I'm gonna have to
So
ask my inspector if he does that.
mhm.
Do you use Crazy Pants? Does he go
He
up that
does.
far?
He does do it.
He does.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to ask him. I've never done that. That's a good idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool. And I
I'm,
mean,
I'm literally
I,
putting this in my notes right
I've
now.
never had a seller get all of their money back. But during COVID, when things were moving really quickly, we had one house that there was like 12 people that downloaded it. So at $20 a pop, they got
Right.
a good amount of their investment back. Not to mention that the house went for $60,000 more than
Right.
list
Well, and that's
price.
the other thing. It's like in certain situations, it's like when we're making $100,000 on something you bought 5 years ago,
Right,
are we really stressing over 400?
right.
And don't get me wrong, maybe in some situations we are. Maybe there are sellers out there who they have to sell and they have to get that $100,000 to fix situations in other areas of their life.
Hmm.
But in most times, if we are selling something and we're going to make that type of profit, then that $400 up front is not a huge issue.
Well, this was a good lead in to my next story. And it was, well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask me, I let the client go. If you ask the client fired me. It's the one and only time so far, knock on wood, but it was over a home inspection. It was an older house up north in Lenore. And we finally got it under contract. They were wanting to move off the grid. Long story there.
I don't think a lot of people realize how expensive it is to
It
move off the
it
grid and become a
really is.
homesteader.
But the end of days is approaching, so we were going off the
Mm,
grid.
okay.
We're selling their house. It's old house. And it wasn't, I don't believe that well maintained is was good wording for that, because was it kept up? Yes, but there was an elderly couple that they just it needed a lot of work.
Right.
And I knew that at the listing appointment. We talked about it. She had a number in mind for the listing, and I brought her down a little bit for where I thought it should be. Home inspection came back, and it turned out that their whole crawl space was riddled with water and
Ooh.
mold. And that's a huge thing. The buyers just wanted Serve Pro to go in and to remediate it, and they were willing to pay half of that cost, right? Which was shocking to me, but
Right.
I was like,
The
this is
buyer paying that
yeah, this
before
is going
like,
to
yeah.
be the best probably case scenario you're going to see because otherwise you're going to have to repair this out of
Right.
pocket. But that is not what they wanted to do. They wanted to stay at the price that they were at. They didn't want to have it fixed, and so that buyer ended up walking away. But we ended up terminating 3 days later our listing agreement because she didn't want to redo the property disclosure for moisture or anything like that. And she told me that I was not supposed to tell anybody that there was mold in the crawl space because it was
That's not how that
not,
works.
it's not how it works. But she said that a friend of hers had told her that it wasn't a dangerous mold, it was fine.
No.
No.
That's so if you're a new agent and you're listening to this, focus on the next 2 seconds of what I'm about to say. That is not how that works. You have to disclose it. If you are aware of something, whether or not your seller wants to put it on there, it is your responsibility to disclose it.
Right. Even in
Case
like putting
closed.
it in the agent notes, they might not want to put it in the disclosure, but you got to share. Like when it
Yeah.
comes to something like that, absolutely. So the funny thing was I was with KW at the time, and she had all of my contact information, and she actually called a KW office in Winston-Salem, which is not
Not
anywhere
anywhere
near
near. That's like,
us.
so to put that into perspective, if you're not local to Charlotte or know where we are, that's what, 2
2
hours?
hours, yeah.
Yeah, from you?
So she called a KW office there, who then was like, we don't know a Brenna, right? And so the broker in charge from Winston-Salem actually looked me up on the MLS and got in touch with my current broker in charge, and then he called me. It was a whole mess. And I had already called him that morning and was like, listen, I can't do this. I don't know what my next steps are because
Right.
obviously if somebody calls, I can't say, oh no, everything's great. And we'd been talking about it that morning, and then he called and he's like, actually, it turns out she wants to terminate the listing because you aren't working in her best interest. And I said, oh, okay, that's cool. And he said, listen, it's probably the best thing that could have happened from this situation because, a buyer comes in and then you don't want to get in trouble with the commission with an unhappy seller who thinks that spoiled her home sale by being
Right.
honest. So
Right.
that was the only time that I had a listing withdrawn, but whew, I
Right?
slept better that night though. So I think that it was the best case scenario for that moment.
Yeah, that's you handled that well because I would have done the same thing. I would have been, well, I'm not going to go to jail or get fined or get in trouble because you don't want to do the right thing.
Mm.
That's not at all how I run my business. Thank you. Bye. Always if you're not a realtor listening to this for some reason, this is a reason to hire a realtor because we are going to make sure you're aware of those things. We're going to check everything we can to protect you to make sure that neither of us nor our client ends up being sued because
Right.
we don't want that.
Right. And the flip side
Don't
of
want
that,
that at
going
all.
back to the appraisal, we're not going to say, "Hey, no, listen, we really need to like drop. You need to sell it 40,000 below where I told you originally because this is the appraisal. The appraisal is the appraisal. It is what it is." Because
Right.
that wasn't what was in her best interest. For sure. It wouldn't have made sense for her to sell it at that point.
Right.
Like
Or and I also think that's kind of situational though too, because like so I have one, we're waiting for appraisal to come back today. When I ran the original comps, we came in with an offer $20,000 under asking because I said I can't find the comps to truly support this. Now we negotiated somewhere in the middle And at one point, my client said, "Oh, let's just go with what they countered with." And I said, "No, no, 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 no." And I educated him and said, "Hey, like if this doesn't appraise, these are the options. You're going to have to come up with the money. We're going to have to ask the seller to come down, or you're going to have to walk from this. And I don't want you to be in any of those situations. So, no, like we have data here. This isn't a one off. Here's the data." Because I'll give it to him. I'll give him all my comps and say, "This is what, you know." And if my client's okay with that, I'll release the appraisal so they can see why it appraised, what comps the appraiser used.
Right.
Because there are times where you have an unrealistic seller and you have to say to them, "Listen, I know this isn't what you wanted." And especially if they've had multiple offers come in around the same range. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but this is what the market is saying it's worth right now."
Yeah.
Because those offers and those appraisal are the market.
Hmm. The other thing
Um,
too, I for that appraisal, I actually the houses that had closed in the neighborhood, I actually called those listing agents and the buyers agents
mm,
to see what their appraisals were at, right? It's closed now. Like they should be able to share that information. And I can't tell you, there were three or four that were actually like full phone conversation, very helpful people. And I love them for that. Because one of the comps that he used, not only it was much smaller, but in the listing notes, it says like needs work and it sold really cheap compared to the other houses in the neighborhood, and it
right,
was a cash sale. So I'd called the buyer's agent and he said that it had been used for a rental for like 10 years. There was a lot of like holes in the wall, like lots of work that needed to be done to the house, and the owner at the time just needed it gone. And he said, honestly, we got a steal of a deal on it. And we could only do that because it was cash and we closed so quickly, right?
right,
We can't use that as a comp. Right?
right. That's not
That's
a
not
comparable
comparable.
property.
If we're missing parts of the flooring and there's holes in the walls and it's like a fire sale, you can't compare that to a freshly updated, much larger, bigger lot, like the whole 9 yards. Like it's not even
Right,
remotely comparable. And he had it as his number three, which, if you've ever had an appraisal, they give like the most weight to the first few that they list. And most weight meaning they base their numbers more off those properties.
right.
And I couldn't. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I was just so adamant. I was like, talking to my seller, I'm like, I can't sleep like this. So if we went on to another buyer, which is what happened, we got a different appraiser with a whole different set of eyeballs apparently, which is great.
Right.
But be proactive for your clients on both sides. Call the agents in the neighborhood. There should, especially if they're closed, there should be no issues calling and asking questions about how it went and
Yep.
what it appraised for, and if there were any issues that you could use to help your appraisal pack, whatever the case may be. We're all in the same business. We all do the same things. If we can lean on each other to get clients what they want, we'll get in trouble less.
Right,
As
right.
an industry, we will not be on the chopping block.
Well, and I think so back to those appraisal packets, one of the things I always make sure, like, yeah, that sales price might be there, but can we scroll to the bottom of the MLS? How much of a seller contribution was there?
Hmm.
What were the credits given? Like that's going to be in there. So like some of these that had a higher sales price on the one I was putting now, and we're talking like max sales price 160. So these
Hmm.
aren't luxury homes,
Right.
but there was a seller contribution on one of them for almost $20,000. That says something to me. So maybe it sold at that price, but like what was going on there? Why did they just instead of renegotiating the sales price, they did a credit? That that says something. So make sure you're looking not just at sales prices. Look at contributions, look at days on market, look at all those things because it's all a factor in what happens.
And look at the
In,
financing. Look at the financing too,
mhm,
because cash is hard because if you're seeing that it's much lower than other houses in the neighborhood and you see that it was a cash sale and it sold 18 days after it was listed, there is something to be said about time versus money. And I've run into it several times with clients. We've got on both sides, buyer and seller. We've got a seller that, she didn't want to take a $40,000 less offer. It wasn't going to work for her. She was willing to wait for something or not
right.
sell. Or you have a buyer who's like, listen, I will take your house off your hands for $20,000 less and I'll close in 10 days. What's it
Yep,
worth? What is your time worth? And that, I mean, that works for business and regular life and house buying and all of the things.
yep,
So it's really, that's why it's such a personal business. You really have to be dialed into your client, your transaction, and what's going to work for everybody.
exactly. Yeah, because it's personal. Well, it is money. It is personal, and there's a lot of emotion that goes into it, whether it's an investor or someone selling the house they grew up in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's always some type of emotion. I have one more,
Okay.
and I think this goes back to boundaries, but it's also a blunder or a setback. When I was new, I was so desperate for business. I got this lead, I don't even remember from where. She was a buyer, and she had no respect for my time, my energy, anything. But we had another showing scheduled. She didn't show up for it, and I had driven an hour out of my way. I was pissed. And I had called her to confirm before. She said she was coming, not an issue. Call her from the showing. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Where are you? No answer. Send a text. No answer. I got to the end of our showing time and I was like, I'm out. And so I sent her a polite email with an agency termination. I was just like, this doesn't seem to be working. I wish you the best of luck working with another agent.
Yep.
And she called me I'm assuming pretending she hadn't seen the email. Okay, so sorry I missed the showing today, but I was at work. You picked the showing time.
Right.
You asked that. I said, "Well, I called you and I text you." "Well, what number did you use?" I said, "This number, the one you gave me." "Well, that's my work cell phone, so I can't answer that. Why would you call my work cell phone?" I had no idea that it was your work phone. And by the way, you just said you were at work.
Right.
So I just politely as possible said, "Hey, there seems to be a miscommunication or a not a good situationship here. So I'm going to terminate. I wish you the best of luck. The form is in your email. You don't have to sign it because I already have. And good luck with your house search."
Mm-hmm.
So just remember to set your boundaries. And that was a hurdle for me because I was so desperate at the beginning that I was like, I'll do anything. I'll do anything to get the deal. No, I won't. I won't let people disrespect me like that or straight up, I guess, lie. Like there was so many things happening there. Um,
Travis and I just talked about that yesterday about like how different it is the last like year or even 2 years from when I first was licensed. When I was like, yes, I will take that $10,000 land deal. Yes, I will drive to Timbuktu and show you one house today and one house tomorrow. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
and how honestly, I was so worried if I didn't do those things that my business would suffer. And we talked about this in the boundaries episode already, but how much has changed since I said, no, this is where I service, this is when I work, and how my business has continued to grow even within that that boundary that I
Yes.
set for myself. So I think that that's important. And I feel like there's such a stigma for people like, "Oh no, you can't fire your client." And I honestly, some people just aren't worth a lawsuit, you know? It's really not. And it's not worth a $3,000 paycheck and it's sometimes it's not worth a $30,000 paycheck. It's not.
Yep. It's not. And I've had the psycho client who literally said to me, he was accusing me of all sorts of things I didn't do. Come to find out there was a major substance mental health issue I had no aware of. No, I was not aware of. But he one of the things he yelled to me at one point was, "I hope your $2,500 commission was worth it." And I was like,
It
"It
wasn't.
wasn't." Thank you though. Like I couldn't say that to him, but everything in me wanted to be like,
Right.
"No, it wasn't actually this hell, not worth
Not
it." And
worth
if I
it.
had known, if I had done my due diligence, because he was an elderly man, I didn't run a forewarn check on him. If I had, I would have known all of the
Mhm.
things happening there. But yeah, I it was just why is she calling me? I don't
The
know.
moral of the story is, I think, whatever blunder or hiccup or speed bump, whatever you want to call them that we come across, I think that the we can't just throw our hands in the air. You know what I mean? You have to still put your head down and work through it, whether it means going back on the market for a new appraisal or firing that client or, starting as a solo agent and building a business from scratch, like whatever the case may be, like there's no excuse why you can't. You can have, what
Yep.
is it? You can have reasons or results, but you have to pick one. Reasons or results. So, I hope you pick results.
Yes. Pick results and don't give up. Like,
Nope.
especially if you're new in this, those blunders and those hurdles are going to feel really big and devastating. Just keep moving forward. You'll be fine. Just keep moving forward.
What do the Dory thing?
Just
Keep
keep
swimming.
swimming. Just keep swimming. Wallaby Way, Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. That's hilarious. Yeah, it's gonna be
All
fun.
right, y'all. Well, don't get discouraged. There are going to be hurdles at every stage of this career. There's an ebb and flow to this. There are things you can work really hard to avoid, but if you do encounter them, don't give up. You've got this. You can do it.
Yeah, we got a new year coming. Christmas is coming. It's gonna be
Yes.
great. It's gonna be great. So
Yes.
we'll see you next week.
See you.
Bye.